Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
The Tropics, we are right here on our normal, regular scheduled time for Tuesdays at 12:30, but we do have a lot to talk about. If you tuned in yesterday, we were talking a lot about Humberto and Imelda. Hi, I'm meteorologist Rebecca Berry. Welcome to the WFLA Stream Center. I want to introduce you to our featured meteorologist of the program. It's Chief Meteorologist Joel Young from our sister station KARK. Thanks so much for joining us, Joel. You are no stranger to the program.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
All right, we have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to get us started really quickly. For weather nerds around the world, this is a day that we have been waiting for. The Fujiwara effect is occurring in the Atlantic. So if you went to parties in high school, unlike us, let me explain the Fujiwara effect really quickly. And so what is happening out there in the tropics right now is one hurricane is dragging the other hurricane away from the United States. And so the Fujiwara effect refers to how hurricanes interact with each other. And so the more fun version of Fujiwara is when both systems are of equal strength. Then they just kind of dance around each other. They pull around each other and they do a really cute little dance. And it's pretty rare. Now we're getting the slightly less fun Fujiwara, but it's taking Imelda away from us, so we'll take it. So here's what's going on right now. Humberto was more powerful than originally predicted. If you'll remember just a day or two ago, it was a Category 5 storm. And then Imelda was slower to form and slower to move north, and that allowed them to get close enough. And the fact that Humberto was so strong, it allowed them to start to interact. And that's what changed the track dramatically from what we were seeing on Friday and Saturday to what we were seeing on Sunday and Monday. If you'll remember, Friday and Saturday's track had Imelda making its way over the Carolina coastline slowly. And so we were going to see flooding in the low country. We were going to see inland flooding from all the rain as it started to fall apart. But the fact that Humberto got so strong and they got so close, Humberto is pulling Imelda away from the coastline almost at a 90-degree angle. It's been a dramatic turn, and so we've seen Imelda go from moving to the north to moving to the east, maybe northeast, east-northeast there, but almost due east, following in the footsteps of Humberto. And so the reason that they're not quite doing that classic dance like we kind of were hoping to see out there is because Humberto was so much of a more powerful system than Imelda. So in this version of the Fujiwara effect, it's going to pull Imelda with it kind of in its track. And now one thing you should know about the Fujiwara effect is it rarely works out great for either system. Only if it's really a monster gobbling up a weaker system does it ever work out. But we're already seeing some weakening from Humberto. The outflow from Imelda has kind of torn apart some of the core. And so they will most likely end up being together as some part of extratropical low pressure system in the North Atlantic. But for the most part, this is the slow death of both systems. And so it's going to pull Imelda further and further away from the coast, and they're going to somewhat merge near Bermuda and then make their way off into the North Atlantic. And so when you're looking at the satellite imagery, Humberto looks like a completely different storm than it did yesterday, especially yesterday early on. It still had a really close defined center, but that outflow from Imelda started to impinge on the core of Humberto and started to weaken it structurally. So let's get to the latest with both storms. Imelda, now a hurricane. Category 1 hurricane with 80-mile-per-hour winds. It's moving to the northeast at 7 miles per hour, and it's expected to take an even more easterly direction. And so that's Bermuda right there. It's got some hurricane warnings up, as you can see. So Bermuda's not having a great time with this, but everyone else is very relieved it's not headed a little bit closer to the Carolinas. It'll be a tropical storm, probably an extratropical system by the weekend in the North Atlantic there. And the forecast models agree on this. There's not a lot of diversion, even just a dip here or there, maybe with one of the models, but we're just not looking at that cooked spaghetti models. We're looking at uncooked spaghetti models. They're all generally headed in the same direction. And when we talk about wind gusts, we are getting a little gusty along the coastline because of our proximity to Imelda over along the east coast of the state. You know, I'm here in Tampa, and it's just kind of a lightly breezy day. It's a pretty pleasant breeze out there. But along the coastline, we're seeing some gusts just offshore, close to 40 miles per hour. That will cut down by Thursday as these systems head off. But look at these wind gusts closer to especially Bermuda Bermuda, upwards of 60 miles per hour, so over hurricane force winds. We start to see that shrinking in nature on Friday a little bit, and that core really shrinks on Saturday as well in terms of size, and we eventually by Sunday start to see it reduce in terms of intensity as well. And so let's talk about the waves, because if you work with a surfer, they called in sick today because we've got overhead surf from Jacksonville to Jupiter. We're talking 10-foot wave sets rolling in. Now it's pretty messy, the side of the storm we're on right now, but as Imelda starts to pull away from us and we get that reverse wind, that'll clean the surf up. So that's what all the surfers are kind of waiting for, sitting on go for that shift in winds. Look at the wave heights for Bermuda, because this is the Euro, but it basically has Imelda and kind of combining with Humberto near Bermuda there. And these are 30, 40-foot waves that are possible. Definitely the 30-foot wave range near Bermuda. So very rocky out there on the open Atlantic, and that continues to migrate northward. Those waves start to come down over the weekend. We only have one of those cores left there. But I did want to pull up in our camera network, this is Daytona Beach. So famous beach, of course. You can look and see how rough the surf is. I don't see any surfers out there right now. And like I said, pretty messy out there, especially to see the waves breaking this far out. This is a really long, wide, expansive beach if you've ever been there. This is high tide, of course, and we are going to see higher than normal high tides as a result of Imelda and that onshore flow, as well as the bigger swell. And so for non-surfers, it's very dangerous to get in the water. Not that it's a good beach day out there anyway, but the rip current risk will be elevated into the weekend because of these higher swells. And so when the wind shifts direction, it's going to clean these up. It'll get a little glassier and a little less choppy out there, and that's when all the surfers will be taking to the waves on the east coast of Florida. Hurricane Hunter aircraft flying through this system right this second. So far, the highest sustained wind speed they found is 100 miles per hour. That's vastly different than the 80 miles per hour from the 11 a.m. advisory. So we may see them when they come out with the 2 p.m. advisory update the numbers a little bit, or at least at the 5 p.m. advisory when they do the full update with the track update and everything. It may be intensifying as we speak, which is odd because Humberto generally weakening as we speak. It's down to a category 1 as well. The maximum sustained winds at 80 miles per hour, and it's not expected to be a system much longer, kind of dissolving into a low pressure system by tomorrow, and then at that point they'll stop issuing advisories on it, and that's why the forecast track ends. But when you look at the spaghetti models, you can see they are also in a very strong consensus, and very strong agreement that that's what we'll see. And so we had a really complicated steering pattern, and we didn't know how much Fujiwara was going to play into the eventual track of Imelda and Humberto, but that's exactly how it played out. It didn't necessarily get caught up in this low pressure system. It was more of the fact that they were able to get so close, and they were so, Humberto in particular was so powerful at the time that all these came into fruition. And so we'll start to see some changes because these two storms are moving over these hot temperatures, and so the hot temperatures of the sea surfaces, it will cause a temporary upwelling, and less hot water will be at the surface there, which removes some of the energy from the tropics out there. So this is a good thing to have strong fish storms because they use up some of the energy out there, they use up some of the heat out there, and it makes it less, slightly less conducive for another storm. But there's so much energy out there right now, everyone's immediately asking, okay, we're safe from these two, but what about the next one? So let's talk about this tropical wave tracker. This is Imelda, this is Humberto. They're headed this way. Let's take a look at the rest of the Atlantic where we might typically see some development and swirling. And so we've got an open tropical wave, but we're not seeing any spinning with this. This is the next tropical wave rolling off the coastline of Africa. And I wanted to add the Saharan dust layer to this so that you could see that it's still a little dusty out there, especially for this time of the year. So that's the Saharan dust rolling off the coastline of Africa here, a little swath of it that's weakening just to the north of this tropical wave. And so that's most likely impeding some development here, or at least making it more difficult for that to develop. And so it's looking a little quiet, just like the whole season has. And so here we are in terms of names. We're up to Imelda, and I'll have to change the forecast icon for Imelda because it did become a hurricane earlier today. I just have it listed as a tropical storm right now. But when you look at this list of names, it is wild that we are this far in the season and we are not seeing further down on the list. We love it, we'll take it, but it is certainly unusual for us for this time of the year. And so I've gotten myself back to the stream center right now, and I want to bring Joel back in, who's been so patiently waiting to get excited about the Fujiwara effect.
Oh, absolutely. But I just got a comment. Out of all of these storms that we've had this season, there have been 3 major hurricanes, and none of them made landfall. I think this season is great. I think this season also is a perfect example I guess what could have been, and so thankfully wasn't, that it only takes one storm. Had Aaron or Gabrielle been a little farther west, and obviously that we don't want to think about what could have been when we've had a season as fortunate so far, and hopefully it stays that way. But I mean, it's a perfect example of it only takes one. And
indeed, yeah. Oof. And so, we're still not done. I was talking amongst the desk yesterday saying that if we can get to the third week of October, I'm going to be pretty excited at that point, because it's a lot harder for systems to form at that point.
Absolutely. And it's great to see that those tropical waves, at least out there right now, don't seem to have much future, at least in the models right now. So Let's hope it stays that way.
And I did want to remind our viewers, normally I do it at the top of the show, so you have some time to get in your comments and questions. So get to those keyboards if you can. This is an interactive show. In order for us to be able to see your comments and us to pull them on screen and address them and answer them, you do need to use one of our branded hashtags. And they are, so start your comment with either hashtag Hey Rebecca or hashtag Hey Joel, and we will be able to answer your questions here. We were talking before the show started about how rare the Fujiwara effect is. And man, we talked about it a lot in the past couple of years, because you would see the forecast models predicting it would happen, that they would get close enough to do that cute little dance out in the open Atlantic, usually is where it occurred. But in recent memory, I've been forecasting for about 18 years now, I don't remember it happening in the Atlantic.
Yeah, I don't remember it happening either. And nor have I mean, obviously, if we haven't seen it, then, but in the models, sometimes like we'll see it, but a lot of times it doesn't. In this case, it happened to our benefit. Like the Fujiwara, you had Humberto out there stronger than Imelda. So Imelda was more highly influenced by the stronger one. But the fact that it completely steered it in the opposite direction of the US, beautiful thing. So not only did we get treated with a Fujiwara, but the Fujiwara saved the Carolinas.
Yeah, I don't remember a hurricane saving us from a hurricane ever. Not even just when I've been forecasting, but I just don't remember that happening ever. Now, the Fujiwara effect does happen a lot more in the Pacific, but sure. For an Atlantic, we love it. We'll take it every time, especially if it's going to pull these storms away from us. The comments and questions are rolling in. I don't know if you know this, but we're live on TikTok too, in addition to Facebook, and our TikTok audience is on fire. So we're going to go ahead and start the Q&A portion of this. And so if you use that hashtag, we can pull your questions on screen. The hashtags are Hey Rebecca or hashtag Hey Joel, and we're starting off with a hashtag Hey Rebecca. Who names these hurricanes? These are interesting. Oof. Oof, yes, they are. Yes, they are. And they're going to get more interesting. And do you know why they're going to get more interesting? Because the I name is the most retired name. Because when a hurricane is particularly deadly or dangerous, they retire that name. We wouldn't want to have to live through another Hurricane Katrina or anything like that. And so then they have to replace the names. These names are by the World Meteorological Organization. They meet during the summer and decide if they're going to retire a name. And if they're going to retire a name, what are they going to replace it with? And it gets more complicated from there, because we have 6 lists of names that we kind of cycle between, and they start with a female on one year and they start with a male on one year, and they alternate after that. You can see Andrea female, Barry male, Chantal female, Dexter male. And so when they have to come up with the replacement names, they have to be either a male or female depending on where they are in the list. Of course, it has to start with the particular letter. And now they're also focusing on making them more diverse, because a lot of tropical systems hit Spanish-speaking countries more so than English-speaking countries and that sort of thing. And so the fact that the letter I is the most retired, that's going to get especially funky moving forward, because there's not that many names out there that start with I. So if you remember Isaias, it's up next year.
Oh yeah? Is it already time for Isaias?
It's already time for Isaias again. So.
I just feel like it was a couple of years ago that we were struggling with that pronunciation.
That's because we're old. The time flies.
Yeah. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I always find it interesting, though, when we go back and we see the names that Imelda replaced. So I guess it would have been 12 years ago. Ingrid, I think. I looked back yesterday. Ingrid retired, and so they replaced it with Imelda. Did you realize that 6 years ago, Imelda it was a tropical storm. It hit Texas, but it dumped a tremendous amount of rain in southeast Texas. And I don't know that it was necessarily discussed as a name to be retired, but it was very impactful for the Beaumont area. So, sometimes these storms still leave a big footprint, but don't get retired. So Imelda has had a history there in Texas, and thankfully it's not going to be this year.
Yes, thank goodness. When they started focusing more on inland flooding, I think that may be a consideration moving forward. 12 years ago, our message was surge, 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 surge is what kills. Watch out for the surge. And so now the messaging from the National Hurricane Center has evolved in a good way to properly communicate that inland flooding threat a little bit more strongly. And so moving forward, I wouldn't be surprised if we had some storms retired from inland flooding, because it is such a huge factor. I mean, just look at Helene last year across the Carolinas. Yeah. Wow, that was wild. All right, we got more featured comments rolling in. This is from Jeannie M. Hashtag, hey, Rebecca, is it possible for the storms to combine and create a giant superstorm? I'm going to let Joel weigh in on this one, the Fujiwara effect and the many forms it can take.
Well, Rebecca, for one thing, you mentioned it earlier, the Fujiwara effect rarely really benefits either storm. Usually, from what I've seen over, when I've seen it in the models, because obviously we haven't seen too many real world examples, at least in the Atlantic, oftentimes if they do merge, they don't necessarily become, so usually it's the smaller of the two that is heavily influenced by the other one. So like in this case, Humberto yesterday was a 4, at one point was a 5, but Humberto is the one influencing Imelda in this case. And usually if they merge, it's because one absorbs the other, not so much that they merge. And so in this case, like let's, and I think they are eventually going to be blending together, but it usually involves one of them weakening completely. So it's not like you have two big storms that combine and make one bigger storm. It's often that you have a strong, or I say often, it's you might have,
we've had it in a lifetime.
Right, you might have one that pulls the other one in, and it may not strengthen the strongest one. It may actually weaken it some. We haven't seen too many examples of it, but
yeah, we're learning as we go as well.
You pulled this graphic up. This might be a great example there.
Yeah, and so this is the future wind gusts, and it kind of shows the two separate systems right here. And then as you play it out, kind of near Bermuda, that's where they tend to merge a little bit. But at this point, if you were to, I know it looks very scary here on the wind gust map, and it will be very windy out over the open Atlantic, but at this point, they don't share the characteristics that keeps them a tropical system at this point. They're an extra tropical low. And so it's still a bigger storm system, but it's not a true tropical storm or hurricane at that point. And so this also plays into our next question. This is from XB. Hashtag, hey, Rebecca, I'm in Bermuda. What can we expect here? Man, Bermuda is the only one mad about the Fujiwara effect right now. And they should be, because the Imelda, had no intentions of heading towards Bermuda a couple of days ago until that pull from Humberto. And so, unfortunately, it's going to be a really rough stretch of days, because you're going to have what is now Category 1 Hurricane Humberto going by, and then right on the heels of it, Imelda, and then them kind of merging almost right just to the north of Bermuda. And so if you see that St. George there in the middle of your screen, that's Bermuda. So through it's Tuesday, and you're already seeing some tropical storm force winds right now in Bermuda. And so you can expect hurricane force winds on and off Wednesday, even into Thursday. And then it's the wave heights as well that's probably going to be very problematic. And so the wave heights forecast brings some 30 and 40 foot waves pretty close to Bermuda for a couple of days. And so it's not necessarily the waves from Humberto, but more Imelda. And then you can see on this forecast model kind of showing Imelda pulling Humberto down. So maybe we do end up getting the dance there a little bit, but they're so weak at this point that it's kind of hard to see. And so if you are in Bermuda, it's going to be a rough couple of days. We are hoping you guys stay safe. Next question. Hashtag, hey, Rebecca, is there anything happening in the Gulf? And that's also something Joel and I were talking about, how nice and quiet it's been. And so I'm going to pull up the map here for you, but Joel can take this one away. Not much going on out there.
Not a lot happening. I will say that it did look like there would be possibly a very weak, I won't even call it a tropical wave, but just a very weak area of low pressure that might try to develop out there. And it may just pull in some tropical moisture into the deep south. Doesn't look like anything at this point that develops into a full-blown tropical system or anything like that. It just might bring us, at least here in Arkansas, maybe some much-needed rainfall. So if we're lucky,
I was watching that in the forecast models as well, because especially as we move into October, the Gulf is kind of a danger zone for Southwest Florida here, because we do start to see the fronts pushing through, like the one that pushed through this weekend, and that turns the systems that are in the Gulf towards the coastline. So I've been watching those forecast models like a hawk as far as any Gulf development, because that is really the only thing that could rain on our parade of a quiet season here is some Gulf development. And unfortunately, the water's really warm in the Gulf right now as well.
Yeah, and as I look at that, it just brings me back to Milton from last year. I took that same track.
Yes, unfortunately, and the timing is about the same. Unfortunately, here we are headed into mid-October, and luckily things are looking pretty quiet out there right now. And so we have another question. This one's from Erica, #Hey Rebecca. How does warm ocean water affect hurricane intensity? I'm in Puerto Rico. And so I'll go ahead and let Joel take this one away while I pull up our current sea surface temperature map, because Puerto Rico got some hot water right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it absolutely. Those tropical systems, I mean, the Earth, it is always trying to find a balance. It's always trying to cool itself off in some way. And so Earth's way of doing that is developing hurricanes, so the tropical system, the hurricane, there's a lot of evaporation, a lot of that warm Gulf water, but it rises and it cools, and it, creates these huge clouds that eventually, when they become more organized, form into a hurricane. And so the warmer that water is, the more fuel it is for those tropical systems, as long as there's no wind shear there to tear it apart. So yeah, that's definitely the fuel to the fire there, and that water is hot.
It is, and we would worry about rapid intensification with water this hot. And, the only hurricanes became major storms, and they all went through rapid intensification this season. Of the 3 hurricanes we've had, they all went from Category 1 to a major hurricane within a 24-hour period. Just really, really warm waters out there.
Yeah. That area there, southwest of Cuba, they're kind of this time of the season.
Yeah. I'm just like, calm down, get a little cooler. We don't need that out there. This featured comments from Chase Morgan, #Hey Rebecca. What's the difference between a hurricane, a typhoon, and a cyclone? And the answer is location, location, location. And so both hurricanes and typhoons are cyclones. So all of those spinning lows are cyclones. But if you're in the northern hemisphere, generally, or in the Atlantic, we call them hurricanes. A lot of southern hemisphere and a lot of Pacific calls them typhoons. So it can get a little confusing, but they're all generally the same. All right. Next questions. #Hey Rebecca, how far in advance can hurricanes be predicted accurately? Ooh, what do you think about that one, Joel? That's a loaded question.
It's tough. I mean, like, whenever you've got a tropical system that's way out in the Atlantic, it gets a little, I would say, obviously, the closer it gets, the easier it is to forecast them. But we live and die by the models. It all depends on how the models handle it. I will say, in this case, with the Fujiwara going on that we've seen, I kind of had a feeling that the models would not handle it very well, because until both systems become fully developed, it's difficult for us to predict it. And then you throw in the Fujiwara effect, and it became even more difficult. Obviously, before the weekend, it looked like it was going to be moving into the Carolinas, and then models started to really understand how the Fujiwara was going to play out in this case. And so it's, the models started to become a little bit, converge and, come to some agreement. But I would say, at least, how far out, it depends on the situation and where it's at, and if the system is even developed. If the system hasn't developed yet, models aren't going to handle it very well.
We talk about that all the time on air here and on Tracking the Tropics, about how if a system hasn't developed yet, each model's choosing its own starting point, its own center of rotation. So when a system actually develops and they're all feeding off of that actual real data and information and all starting from the same starting point, things always change up a little bit. And one thing we talked about yesterday that you might find interesting, Joel, is the Google AI model. On Friday, when every other model except for the Canadian and the Google AI model were calling for the Fujiwara, and every other model was pulling it into the Carolinas. So that Google AI model's been untested, and we're so far kind of impressed with its performance.
I vaguely remember hearing someone mention that on Friday. And what is it that we call that Google AI model?
Deep mind. Yeah. Deep mind.
What is it called?
Deep mind, I believe.
That's what I was thinking. I wasn't 100% sure about that, but yeah.
That's why I keep calling it the Google AI model, because I'm not 1,000% sure. I'm pretty sure it's deep mind.
Yeah, I think that's what someone else said the other day, and we were talking about it. I couldn't remember.
All right, we got a great question coming in from Darlene Tucker, hashtag Hey Joel. Last week, I heard y'all talk about the unseasonable troughs being hurricane blockers, and now this Fujiwara thing. I hope we get the same protections in the Gulf. Any predictions? Ooh.
Hurricane blockers in the Gulf.
Oh.
I feel like this is the time of year often you get, as we mentioned earlier, you get a front that sometimes dives into the Gulf, and especially if it stalls, it can spin something up. Oftentimes, though, this time of year, if you get a deep trough in there, the shear, doesn't give it a chance to really strengthen that much. But what are your thoughts?
I love to see the second front make it to Tampa in the fall, because that kind of shuts things down. It changes our pattern up a little bit. So if we can just stop something from forming to the south of Cuba, where the hottest water is right now, until that second front pushes through, and we call it faux fall because we only get like 2 or 3 days of it. But if our second round of faux fall arrives and we're still not tracking anything, I'm calling this season a dud in the happiest way possible.
By the way, a little side note, I've got a friend that lives in Miami who was commenting, was just texting me a little while ago and said it felt like fall. And I was like, hold on, he's in Miami. And then I remembered they've got, you've got that northerly flow on the backside of Imelda. I was like, I guess comparatively speaking, it probably does feel like fall.
If you give us South Florida people dew points in the upper 60s or low 70s, we're like, put a sweater on, get something pumpkin spice, we gotta go. All right, we got a great question from Erica, hashtag Hey Rebecca. What makes a hurricane strengthen or weaken? And there's a couple of factors that can strengthen or weaken a storm. And so let's start with strengthening. And so what you want to strengthen is low shear. So that's upper level winds, because hurricanes build their strength vertically through the center of the core. And so if you have upper level winds, it cuts off that ability to build. And so you need low shear, calm upper level winds. You need warm sea surface temperatures, because that's the fuel. And other factors that might be conducive is topography. If a storm moves over like a mountainous region like down in Cuba, it can tear a storm apart. So you need low friction at the ground level as well, because ground level friction as well as upper level shear can disrupt that vertical build of the strength. And when it comes to weakening, if you move into an area of high shear, if it starts to interact with another hurricane, like we're seeing here on our rare Fujiwara effect storm here, or if it moves over a mountain range or starts to move over cooler waters, like when the storm's making into the open Atlantic, that's when we see strengthening or weakening. So that's a really cool comment. I'm going to let Joel address this one. This is our last question of the day, because we are running out of time, but hashtag Hey Rebecca, why do hurricanes form an eye, and how does a smaller eye mean stronger?
Well, that eye is surrounded by the eye wall. So you've got rising air inside the eye wall, which is the strongest part of the storm. In the middle of the storm, you've got that same air that's rising in the eye wall. It's also sinking. So then that's how you get the clear skies in the middle. Does a tighter eye make a stronger storm? That's a good question. I think you're probably thinking of centrifugal force in there. Would you say that, Rebecca? Would you say that a tighter eye would necessarily?
Not necessarily. I think smaller eyes go through eye wall replacement cycles a little bit faster, and maybe might help the storms survive a little bit longer. But I don't think that they're necessarily connected in terms of the smaller the eye, the stronger the storm.
I mean, I understand that take, but at least in terms of tornadoes, I often compare. Does a larger tornado mean that it's a stronger tornado? Not necessarily. You can have I don't know that there's a defined,
yes.
Exact science there.
And that was our last question, because we are running out of time. I want to thank our featured meteorologist. Thank you so much, Joel. You're a star on the show. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon. We really appreciate you. And thank you so much to everyone who liked, commented, questioned, and watched for Tracking the Tropics. We're out.